The dawn broke under a sky swollen with angry clouds, the kind that promised no mercy. Rain hammered the land in relentless sheets, and the river that cut through the northern wind territory had swollen into a roaring beast, carrying debris and shattered branches in its churning current. Every flash of lightning revealed the desperate struggle of the water, twisting and frothing around rocks and fallen trees. And in the middle of that furious chaos, two small figures clung to the muddy banks, their tiny bodies nearly overwhelmed by the relentless pull of the river. Ayani barely ate, her dark hair plastered to her face, and Takakota, a boy of 6, with eyes too knowing for his age, were the children of a tribe whose history was written in the wind and the land. They were soaked teeth chattering, and yet there was a sharpness in their gaze that betrayed an intelligence far beyond their years. Their small hands scratched frantic symbols into the mud, repeating the same pattern over and over. It wasn't play. It wasn't idle doodling. It was a warning, a message sent into the earth, as though the river itself had taught them to speak in secret signs. Ahuli moved like a shadow through the storm, a young warrior of the northern wind tribe, muscles coiled, senses stretched to their limits. He had been tracking the rising water, following the faint calls of the wind through the canyon when he saw them struggling. The river was merciless, each wave threatening to swallow them whole, yet he did not hesitate. Launching himself onto a slick bank, he plunged into the icy water, the current snapping at his legs, the rain stinging his eyes. Ayani's small hands clutched a leather pouch around her neck, her fingers brushing against something precious inside, and she barely noticed the icy water seeping into her bones. Takakota's eyes wide and knowing scanned the horizon, as if he had already seen this moment before, as though the river itself had whispered the story to him in his sleep. Their fear was tempered by focus, a quiet determination to survive, to protect the secret they carried. Ahuli's arms wrapped around Ayani first, hauling her against his chest, feeling the fierce grip of her tiny fingers dig into his wet jacket. Takakota was next, squirming and thrashing, but even in his panic, there was a strange composure, an understanding of the danger that made Ahuli's heart pound faster. The river fought him at every step, dragging him downstream, threatening to tip him over rocks. Yet he pushed through his feet, finding purchase on slippery stones, muscles burning with exertion. As he dragged them toward the bank, the symbols in the mud became clearer in his mind. 3 wavy lines intersected by a single straight mark, a river perhaps, or a boundary, or a warning he could not yet understand. The children's hands had moved with urgency, conveying more than any words could say, and for the first time Ahuli realized that this wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of something much larger, something that would draw the fate of the northern wind tribe and the surrounding lands into a confrontation that no one could ignore. Finally, he reached the bank, collapsing on the mud-soaked and shivering, holding the children close. The river's roar began to fade behind them, but the storm was far from over. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the forested hills, the river, and the desperate figures he had pulled from certain death. Ayani's eyes met his for a moment, dark and solemn, and Takakota whispered something under his breath that sounded almost like a warning. Ahuli knew then that survival was only the first step. The symbols, the pouch, the river, and these children, everything pointed to a story unfolding that he had no choice but to follow. And as the wind howled through the canyon carrying the taste of rain and the scent of wet earth, he understood one thing. This storm was only the beginning, and the river had more secrets to reveal. Ahuli carried Ayani and Takakota through the sodden forest, mud squelching under his boots, the storm still thrumming in the distance. Each step was a battle against the soaked earth and the chill that gnawed at their bones. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes, he reached the edge of the northern wind tribe's camp. The firelight flickered across tents and teepees, casting long shadows that danced like spirits across the wet ground. For a moment, relief surged through him. He had saved them, but the moment was fleeting. From the ridge above the river, a sound rose that made Ahuli's chest tighten. The thunder of hooves, rapid and purposeful, broke through the wind and rain. Dust and mud kicked up into the air as 100 warriors emerged, led by Kestrel, the tribe's chief and father to Ayani and Takakota. His presence was imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes sharp enough to cut through lies. Every warrior was poised, weapons, ready faces set, with the grim determination of those prepared for battle. Ihuli froze for a heartbeat, realizing the misunderstanding that could cost him his life. How could he explain that he had saved these children, not harmed them? The symbols they had drawn in the mud seemed suddenly critical, and the small leather pouch Ayani clutched so tightly became a focal point of suspicion. Kestrel's gaze swept over the camp and finally settled on Ihuli, and in that silent instant the weight of judgment was palpable. Ayani stepped forward, her wet fingers pressing the pouch against Ihuli's hand. Slowly he opened it to reveal a small fragment of carved bone faintly etched with lines and marks. His breath caught. Devil's Bend, the sacred burial ground of their ancestors, was forbidden to all who were not entrusted. Ihuli's pulse raced. He understood now that rescuing the children had plunged him into a matter far larger than a storm or a river. He had become the guardian of a secret he barely understood. The warriors' horses snorted and pawed at the mud, kicking up clouds of dust that mixed with the morning rain, the rising sun casting an orange-gold glow on the scene. It was a tableau of both beauty and imminent danger, the tribe's unity, their precision, the sacred weight of the land itself demanding respect. Ihuli felt the enormity of his task pressing down. He had to protect not only himself, but also the children who had unwittingly carried the key to an ancestral mystery through the torrent. Kestrel's voice cut through the storm's remnants, commanding yet calm. "Who brings my children from the river?" His eyes never left Ihuli's, piercing and searching for truth. The young warrior's voice shook only slightly as he answered, explaining the rescue, the river's fury, and the desperate struggle to save the children's lives. Suspicion lingered, but the chief's gaze shifted to the carved bone. He recognized it immediately, a piece of his father's legacy that marks a connection to the sacred burial site. The air thickened with tension, every warrior's hand near their weapon, every heart aware of the fragile boundary between justice and misunderstanding. Ihuli's responsibility weighed heavier than any physical challenge he had ever faced. The river's threat had been immediate, tangible, and now this protecting the children and honoring the sanctity of Devil's Bend was a test of moral courage. The children, shivering but resolute, pointed to the symbol in the mud, tracing it with their fingers, their faces reflecting knowledge that belied their age. Ihuli nodded subtly, understanding that the message was more than a warning. It was a bridge, a connection, a plea for understanding. The tribe's traditions demanded respect for the land and its spirits, and Ihuli realized that survival was no longer just about flesh and blood. It was about honoring a heritage that ran deeper than the river itself. As the morning sun pierced through the clouds, illuminating the warriors' faces and the glint of weapons, Ihuli stood tall, holding the children close. He knew the moment required not only bravery, but wisdom. Every eye upon him waited for a choice. Every heart felt the weight of what was at stake. The river's fury had been conquered, but the true storm, the test of honor, trust, and life itself, was only beginning. The dawn had barely settled when Ihuli realized the danger surrounding them went far beyond the river or the storm. The small fragment of carved bone in Ayani's hands was more than a sacred relic. It was a signal, a key to a betrayal that threatened the Northern Wind Tribe's very survival. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain as the pieces slowly fell into place. Marcus Gann, the territorial government's translator, was no simple bureaucrat. Ihuli remembered reports of land disputes, strange agreements, and whispered complaints from neighboring tribes, but no one had dared challenge the authority of the officials. Now, in the mud and mist of the riverbank, it became horrifyingly clear Gann had been manipulating the translations of treaties, skewing the words to favor settlers. and in doing so stealing land that had belonged to the tribe for generations. Ahuli held Ayani and Takakota close, studying the symbols etched in the mud again. The wavy lines, the straight mark, they weren't random. They were instructions, a path, a warning. The children had carried the clues, unwittingly following what they believed to be their grandfather's call. But someone had used their innocence as a tool. Gan had deliberately placed the carved bone where the children could find it, knowing it would lead to the northern wind camp and implicate any who discovered it. Ahuli's stomach churned at the cunning cruelty of it. Kestrel's face darkened as he took the bone, his fingers tracing the familiar marks. "This belonged to my father," he said quietly, but with the weight of centuries behind the words. "It was never meant to leave Devil's Bend." His eyes met Ahuli's. "They want you blamed a white man caught with sacred objects demanding blood payment according to our law." The realization hit like a thunderclap. The river, the storm, the rescue, it had all been manipulated. Gan's design was meticulous, led the children to the sacred site, force Ahuli into the role of unwitting trespasser, and then call upon the law or superstition to eliminate anyone who might uncover the truth. Ahuli and Kestrel moved quickly, coordinating with the children, who now understood more than their age should allow. Takakota's memory of every twist of the river, every mark in the mud became a map. Ayani's insistence on protecting the pouch revealed the critical piece Gan had hoped to conceal. Together, they traced the steps of Gan's deception, unraveling the path of lies and manipulation that stretched across the land and the tribe's history. When Marcus Gan arrived boasting a false story of searching for the missing children, his confident smile faltered under Kestrel's piercing gaze. Ahuli noted every twitch, every hesitation, and every attempt to redirect blame. The confrontation was tense, electric. The river's fury had been nothing compared to this storm of truth. Gan protested, claiming the children had misunderstood that the artifacts were found by chance, that all translations were for the sake of progress. But the carved bone, the mud symbols, the children's recounting, and the undeniable chain of events left no room for deception. Each detail, Kestrel and Ahuli confirmed, chipped away at Gan's arrogance. The children, shivering from cold but resolute, watched their enemy unravel before their eyes. Every lie he spoke was stripped bare by the careful attention of those who valued honor above expedience. Ahuli stepped forward, voice steady, despite the tension, and accused Gan of orchestrating the theft of sacred artifacts, falsifying treaties, and manipulating children to conceal his crimes. Kestrel's warriors stiffened, ready to enforce justice, but it was the clarity of evidence and the bravery of the young witnesses that carried the day. Gan's defenses crumbled. He tried to speak, tried to assert authority, but each word fell against the weight of truth. The children, once instruments in his scheme, became symbols of resilience and moral clarity. Ahuli watched as the arrogance of power collapsed in the face of wisdom, courage, and integrity. In that moment, the river's roar seemed a distant echo, and the storm outside faded. All that remained was the triumph of justice and the revelation of truth. By mid-morning, the conspiracy was exposed. Gan's manipulations lay bare, his plans thwarted not by force, but by vigilance, intelligence, and unwavering moral resolve. Ahuli's heart, still racing from the river, now swelled with the satisfaction of knowing that the children were safe, the sacred ground protected, and the tribe's honor preserved. The tension that had gripped the northern wind camp dissipated slowly, replaced with a cautious relief and a profound respect for the bravery of both warrior and child. By mid-morning, Marcus Gan was firmly in custody, his schemes laid bare before the Northern Wind Tribe and the local territorial authorities. Documents that had been manipulated, treaties twisted, and sacred artifacts stolen were all returned to their rightful owners. The carved bones were placed carefully back at Devil's Bend, wrapped in cloth, and handled with reverence, the ground itself seeming to sigh in relief as ancestral spirits were honored once more. Ahuli watched silently, knowing the river's fury had been nothing compared to the storm of deceit they had just survived, and yet here was a sense of justice finally fulfilled. With Gan's treachery exposed, Ahuli took a step forward that few could have expected. Instead of seeking personal reward or recognition, he proposed a gesture of cooperation to Kestrel and the elders, a voluntary transfer of certain lands along the river, ensuring that all disputes arising from the forged treaties could be resolved peacefully. It was a decision that emphasized fairness and foresight rather than conflict, and the tribe's leaders met his suggestion with a mix of respect and cautious optimism. The gesture symbolized a bridge between two worlds, an opportunity to build understanding and trust rather than prolong hostility. Ahuli's choice carried more than legal implications. It reshaped his life entirely. The young warrior, once solitary and solely defined by his skill and bravery, found himself welcomed into the heart of the tribe. He was offered a place among the people he had served, a role that went beyond the battlefield. For the first time since he had left his family behind as a boy, he felt the warmth of belonging, a sense of purpose that stretched beyond personal survival to nurturing, teaching, and protecting a community. The children Ayani and Tagakota became more than survivors of a storm. They were teachers and companions. Ahuli began to instruct them in English, while they in turn shared with him the nuances of their Apache language and customs. The exchange was a delicate weaving of cultures, a quiet demonstration of how trust and understanding could transcend age and experience. Through laughter, playful learning, and shared stories, they built a bond that carried both the weight of history and the lightness of hope. Days passed, and the natural world around Devil's Bend slowly returned to calm. The river, once wild and threatening, flowed gently past the sacred site. Mist rose from the water in soft morning light, and the surrounding hills, still glistening from the storm, provided a breathtaking backdrop of serenity. Children splashed in shallow pools, their laughter echoing across the valley, while Ahuli and Kestrel stood nearby, observing, guiding, and ensuring that the fragile peace of both land and spirit remained intact. Evenings brought quiet reflection. Ahuli would sit by the riverbank watching the sun set behind the distant mountains, thinking of the path that had brought him here, from the desperate rescue in the storm to the revelation of Gan's treachery, and now to a life enriched by family friendship and community. The sacred ground had been restored, the stolen artifacts returned, and the children's trust honored. It was a moment that felt both miraculous and inevitable, a reminder that courage and integrity often bore the sweetest fruit when least expected. The tranquility of the landscape mirrored the newfound harmony among the people. Campsites buzzed with the quiet rhythm of daily life. Fires crackled, tents were repaired, and conversations flowed easily among warriors, elders, and children alike. Ahuli found himself participating not only in communal tasks, but also in the stories and traditions of his people, helping to teach and protect, to heal and connect. In doing so, he became a living bridge between the past and the present, between the old ways and the new, between trust earned and trust restored. In the gentle glow of early morning, with the river whispering secrets to the rocks and the mountains standing sentinel over the valley, Ahuli felt an enduring sense of hope. The ordeal had tested every measure of courage, wisdom, and compassion he possessed, yet it had also revealed the strength of unity, the value of justice, and the power of human connection. Through peril, deception, and reconciliation, he had discovered a life richer than survival, a life defined by purpose, community, and the quiet joy of belonging. Ahuli stood at the riverbank, watching the gentle flow of water reflect the first golden rays of dawn. Around him, Ayani and Tagakota splashed in the shallow pools, their laughter echoing across the valley, carefree and unburdened. It was hard to believe that just months ago the river had been a raging force that almost claimed their lives, and that the simple act of rescue had set in motion a chain of events that reshaped the destiny of an entire community, from saving the children to confronting danger to uncovering Marcus Gann's deceit. Ahuli's journey had been one of courage, wisdom, and unyielding integrity. The carved bones returned to Devil's Bend, now rested under the watchful eyes of the elders, a symbol of the tribe's resilience and the respect owed to their ancestors. Ahuli's role had shifted from solitary warrior to guardian of tradition, a bridge between generations and between cultures. Through his bravery, he had protected not only the children, but also the sacred trust of his people. The story of survival had become a story of justice. In the quiet moments, Ahuli reflected on the lessons the ordeal had taught him. Courage was more than facing danger. It was standing for what was right, even when the cost was uncertain. Integrity and action mattered more than fear or self-interest, and a single act of kindness could ripple outward, changing lives and shaping history. The young ones, with their intelligence and insight, had reminded him that even the smallest hands could carry great responsibility, and that respect for culture and community was a strength, not a limitation. The children's play by the river now carried new meaning. Every splash, every triumphant shout was a reminder that life could flourish when trust was honored, and that the bonds between people, family, community, and those who chose to walk alongside them were far more valuable than land power or fleeting advantage. Ahuli felt the peace of belonging settle over him, a warmth that had been absent during his solitary years. The valley, restored and thriving, mirrored the reconciliation that had taken place among the people. The river, no longer a force of chaos, but a witness to harmony. Ahuli's connection to the community was now tangible in every interaction, teaching the children English while learning their language and stories, sharing knowledge of the land, and guiding new members of the tribe. He had discovered that real strength lay not in the might of one warrior, but in the willingness to serve, protect, and create bridges where division had once ruled. The legacy of that fateful morning, when the storm had tested courage and judgment, was a living example of how justice, empathy, and collaboration could transform a community. As the sun climbed higher, casting warm light across the valley, Ahuli felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The river's roar had passed, the danger had been faced, and the truth had prevailed. Life had returned to a rhythm of laughter, learning, and shared responsibility. And as Ayani called out to him, pointing to a small turtle nest in the sand, he realized that the smallest lives, like the children or the hatchlings soon to emerge, could hold lessons of resilience and hope far greater than he had ever imagined. If this story of Ahuli Ayani and Takakota has inspired you, remember that courage, compassion, and respect for others are forces that shape our world. Follow epic Western stories to explore more tales from the frontier, where bravery and humanity collide in ways both surprising and profound. Share, like, and comment below to join the journey and help keep these stories alive. Thank you for walking this path with us and for honoring the lessons of courage, family, and community that echo through the land and across generations.